Welcome to the Bare Metal Cyber CRISC Prepcast. This series helps you prepare for the exam with focused explanations and practical context. Controls are the primary mechanisms organizations use to reduce risk, from its inherent level to an acceptable residual state. Without them, risk remains unmitigated, regardless of how well it has been assessed or documented. However, not all controls are equal, and not all controls function as intended. Evaluating the effectiveness of existing controls is essential because it verifies whether the organization's current risk posture is based on real protection or on untested assumption. An ineffective or unmonitored control may provide the illusion of security while leaving exposure unaddressed. CRISC professionals are responsible for ensuring that control validation is embedded in the risk lifecycle. This means moving beyond documentation and into operational reality, where the true value of a control is measured by how well it reduces risk. On the exam, many scenarios that describe persistent risks or audit failures are rooted in controls that were present on paper but never evaluated for performance or alignment. Controls come in several categories, each serving a different purpose in the risk mitigation chain. Preventive controls are designed to stop incidents before they happen. Examples include multi-factor authentication, which reduces the chance of unauthorized access, and segregation of duties, which limits fraud or error through enforced checks and balances. Detective controls identify and signal when an issue has occurred. This includes system logs, automated alerts, and intrusion detection systems. Corrective controls help recover from incidents or return systems to a secure state. These include backup solutions, patch management processes, and incident response plans. CRISC professionals must ensure that each risk is managed using a mix of controls suited to its nature, impact level, and the business function it affects. On the exam, if a scenario shows risk being treated with only one control type, especially when others are required, it often signals an incomplete control strategy. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other podcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Before a control can be evaluated, it must first be accurately identified. This begins with a thorough review of organizational policies, technical procedures, and system configurations. Prior risk assessments and audit reports often contain valuable references to existing controls, including their intended purpose and documented effectiveness. Governance, risk, and compliance platforms can help surface control listings and link them to specific assets or processes. Interviews with process owners and control operators provide insight into how the controls are actually applied. Importantly, CRISC professionals must verify that controls are not only documented, but also implemented. A control that exists only in policy but not in practice leaves risk unmanaged. On the exam, clues such as the control was listed but not implemented often highlight gaps between intent and reality. The correct answer will involve field validation, process confirmation, or reassessment of residual risk due to the control's absence. Evaluating a control begins with determining whether it is designed effectively. Design effectiveness answers the question, if this control were operating perfectly, would it reduce the risk? Then, operating effectiveness must be assessed. Is the control actually working in practice as designed? The evaluation must also consider control coverage, whether the control applies broadly enough to meaningfully reduce exposure across the relevant environment. Finally, timeliness must be considered. A control that works well but is too slow to act within the organization's tolerance window may still fail to mitigate risk. Risk professionals are trained to evaluate all these aspects in balance. On the exam, when asked how to evaluate a control, the best answers will not rely on design alone or operation alone. They will integrate these dimensions into a complete view of control health and relevance. To evaluate operating effectiveness, CRISC professionals apply several testing methods. Inquiry involves asking the control owner how the control is executed and under what conditions. Observation involves watching the control in action, such as witnessing an access approval or logging event. Inspection means reviewing evidence of the control's performance. This could be access logs, approval forms, or system configurations. Reperformance means executing the control independently to validate that it works, such as attempting a user access request and following it through the approval flow. Each method has strengths, and for critical or high-risk controls, combining methods is the best approach. On the exam, questions that ask how to confirm control operation will often include these testing types. The best answers will recommend a multi-method strategy, especially when control failure would have serious consequences. Once testing is complete, metrics are used to measure ongoing control performance. Key control indicators provide insight into whether a control is functioning over time. These may include failure rates, audit exceptions, or the number of overrides logged. Frequency of use helps show whether a control is applied consistently. Incident correlation helps determine whether control presence reduces actual risk events. User feedback can highlight whether controls are understood and followed. CRISC professionals use these metrics to determine whether a control is sustainable, scalable, and aligned with the organization's appetite for risk. Controls that frequently fail or that generate high exception volumes may signal poor design, operational fatigue, or changing threat conditions. On the exam, performance measurement is often the missing step when a control exists but risk persists. Strong answers emphasize metrics that reflect both consistency and real-world effectiveness. Every control must be traceable back to the risks it is designed to manage. Each entry in the risk register should point to one or more specific mitigating controls. These connections help determine whether residual risk scoring is accurate and whether controls are sufficient given the threat environment. Mapping control strength to risk scenarios also helps identify overtreatment or undertreatment. Overtreatment wastes resources and may cause friction, while undertreatment leaves risk exposure unmanaged. Control mapping also helps identify where control gaps exist, areas where no controls have been applied, or where the controls are not strong enough to reduce risk to within tolerance. Budget and resource discussions often depend on this mapping. On the exam, if a scenario presents residual risk scoring that seems inconsistent with actual control coverage, the best answer will involve validating or correcting the risk-withdrawal linkage. Evaluation results must be documented with precision. CRISC professionals record control testing results, observed gaps, recommendations for improvement, and any follow-up action items. This documentation may reside in a centralized control library, within GRC tools, or in audit working files. Test results should be tied to specific risk scenarios so that risk scoring and treatment plans can be updated accordingly. If a control fails during testing, the associated risk must be reassessed and potentially escalated. Visual dashboards and scorecards can be used to track the health of controls over time, showing which areas are improving and which remain vulnerable. This documentation supports not only internal tracking, but also external audits and compliance reviews. On the exam, when control evaluation is described vaguely or informally, the correct answer usually involves formal documentation, auditability, and integration with governance systems. Deficient controls must be addressed as part of continuous risk management. If a control is poorly designed, it may need to be completely reworked to address the correct threat or asset type. If it is operationally weak, it may need additional oversight, automation, or staff training. In some cases, supplemental controls may be needed to support a weak primary control. This is called compensating control design. If failures recur or go unresolved, escalation to governance bodies may be necessary. In some cases, outdated or redundant controls should be retired, but this must be done carefully to ensure that doing so does not create new gaps. CRISC professionals lead these discussions, helping determine whether remediation should focus on redesign, reinforcement, or removal. On the exam, questions about what to do after a failed control test often point to reassessing the associated risk and initiating a treatment update. CRISC exam questions about control evaluation frequently focus on what was missed or misunderstood in the assessment process. You may be asked why a risk remained after controls were applied, and the correct answer may involve a missing test, poor design, or a gap in implementation. Other questions may ask what step was skipped during control evaluation, and the answer may involve failing to assign a control owner, perform documentation, or combine testing method. You might also be asked, what is the best way to validate a control? and the best answer usually includes combining inquiry, observation, inspection, and reperformance. Finally, if a control is found to be weak, you may be asked what to do next. The correct response will involve reassessing residual risk, updating the register, and launching a treatment or remediation plan. The best answers demonstrate traceability, accuracy, and continuous alignment with risk reduction goals. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Bare Metal Science CRISC Prepcast. For more episodes, tools, and study support, visit us at baremetalsci.com.